Let's go ahead and get started tonight. There is a few people still trickling in, but we're going to have a small crowd tonight, which is good, but that means pressure on you to answer questions and to converse with me a little bit, okay? We're going to finish up the story, the account of Samson tonight, and we're going to get a little bit further into Judges. Don't forget, coming up in June, we're going to start our summer series, and summer series is going to be focused on the Sermon on the Mount this year, and so we're going to walk week by week through the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to have guest speakers from around the state come in, and I'll be gone quite a few times to different congregations, but we have got a great lineup coming in for summer series, so make sure that you're a part of that. And I believe we're trying to work out the discipleship class is going to come into that as well. So we're super excited about that. A couple of prayer requests that we have on our list tonight. First of all, Teresa Sullivan got some fairly bad news with her testing that she had. She has some precancerous condition going on, smoldering multiple myeloma. So right now she's just going to be monitored. And they're not going to start any treatment. It has not gotten to the point where they're going to want to start treatment. So they're going to monitor her very closely. And when it gets to that time, they will treat her with chemo. But Tim, of course, is super worried about it. Teresa is super worried about it. So if you get a chance to pop in and say hi or give them a call, send them a card, that would be awesome. I know they would love that for sure. Also got news today that D.C. Taylor is having a heart stent put in tomorrow, and that's going to be down in Orlando. They found a blockage in one of the lower valves, and so they're going to go ahead and do a stent, and so that'll be down in Orlando, not here at Waterman. Those are the two that I have on the prayer requests that are there. I know we've got a bunch more things that are ongoing, things that we are always praying for. I guess I don't normally do this. I just want to put out, I know a lot of families got a lot going on right now, and sometimes when we look at our own problems and issues, and they seem sometimes minute compared to what is going on, but I'm just going to ask if you can pray for my family's sanity right now. And we've just had some sickness going on in the house, and then the AC breaking and overflowing into our carpet, down through the ceiling, into the garage. And so as I speak, Bethany is at home awaiting ServPro to come and dry things out and get that stuff started. If you didn't know, we already have something going on in the front of the house. It's just a thing. And here's what I know tonight is that is just stuff, and that is just a house. But I'm right where I need to be, and God is incredibly good, and that will work itself out one way or the other. So just pray for sanity. I think I can hold together, and I know Bethany can too, but pray for her in a big way. That would be awesome. And we got traveling going on with a lot of people with Easter coming up. A couple of things I want to remind you of for Easter is, number one, there will be a Good Friday fellowship here, and that is Friday night. It is a potluck, a time of singing, games, and an egg hunt for the kids. But that event is for everybody at church, not just families with kids. So bring your favorite dish and come enjoy some good fellowship and some singing. Also, that next Saturday, the Saturday before Easter, if anybody is interested in the Lads to Leaders program, which will be starting on a grander scale here at Orange Avenue, we're taking a group over to the Lads to Leaders convention in Orlando. It's at the Rosen Center, just to scope it out, see how it's going, and see what is coming for us in the future. So if anybody wants to be involved with Lads to Leaders with us and would want to see what's going on at the convention in Orlando, we would love for you to go to that and to be a part of that as well. And then finally, this Sunday is Easter Sunday, and for the last few years, we have done a sunrise service out at the Baker's house, right on the water, and that is happening again this year. That's a 6:30 in the morning service, and you need to bring a chair because it's going to be wet. And if I remember correctly, you may want to bring bug spray. because I remember getting torn apart last year. And so bring bug spray, bring a chair, and shoes that you don't mind getting wet, because the grass will be wet out there for sure. But there will be, let's say, it says orange juice and donut holes provided. And here's a disclaimer. If you go to the Easter sunrise service, you still got to come to church. All right? It's not you got to come to church still. We won't be having communion out there, so we got to come back and come and worship with the church family. All right? A lot of stuff going on this weekend, but we're going to be in great prayer for all of that. If you have prayer requests you want to add to our prayers, the best thing to do is to send those by email to Laura and to the church email so she can get those in the bulletin. Again, if you give them to me, there's a good chance they won't translate because I write them so fast I can't even read them. And by the time it gets to tomorrow morning, I don't know how to give them to Laura. So email those to Laura and we will get that going. We got a few that went to Israel with us that are not feeling well. And so I think Cora and Ron are out. I think Mr. Eddie might be out right now. So just be in prayer for health overall and all kinds of good stuff going on. But Cora is much.
Today is tonight again as a preventive, but she's much better.
Awesome.
We don't know about Eddie. He's got a sore throat and a cough, and so we'll see.
Okay.
But he has an appointment with his GP tomorrow.
Okay.
It's a good time.
All right. Very good. Well, we're going to be in prayer for all that health stuff going on for sure. Last thing I'll mention before we pray and get started in our lesson, please don't forget, coming up very soon in July is the Equip Conference. And the one thing I want you to think about with that is please go online and register on the website so that we can know how many people are coming to the Equip Conference. It's a free registration. It's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so totally free event. And we're going to have speakers from across the country and all around the Florida and Southeast that are coming to speak. It's going to be an awesome program. And I'm super excited about some of our keynote speakers that are coming in, except the guy on Sunday morning, because that's me. And they kind of forced me to do that. But some of my favorite speakers are coming into town for it. Jack Evans Jr. is coming back. We've got David Young, of course, is going to be there. David Shannon from he's the president at Freed-Hardeman University is coming in. Andrew Itzen is an awesome young minister up in Alabama who is coming down. I'll tell you what, these guys are outstanding. Slate Moore, who a lot of us, he was in Israel with us. He'll be speaking one night. And man, just an absolutely awesome lineup. So please come and be a part of that July 20th through the 23rd. And it'll be an awesome time. Let's pray together, church. Our Father in heaven, we come to you tonight and we just want to praise you. And God, I'm just so thankful and so mindful that we are in a time right now where a lot of our world, even though they don't normally, might be thinking about you. And as we're coming up to Easter Sunday, I know a lot of people are celebrating and thinking about this week that happened before the crucifixion and resurrection. And God, I just pray that as people contemplate and people are thinking, that every step closer to you, even if it's just a thought, that you will draw closer to them and just allow them to know who you are. Lord God, I pray that every single day we are living resurrected lives that are proof of the power of Jesus. And God, we are just so honored to be your children. God, we want to lift up Teresa and Tim Sullivan as they're dealing with some tough news right now with Teresa's health. God, the doctors that are monitoring everything, I pray that you be with them and give them wisdom on when and how to treat Teresa. God, be with DC as he is going into surgery tomorrow with the heart stent. And I pray, God, of course, that the doctors are precise and they get done what they need to get done and that his health can improve. And God, I know there's a lot going on that people may not want to talk about or put on a list. For some reason, God, we like to keep our problems to ourselves and try to work them out on our own. And so, God, I pray tonight that you search our hearts. God, that the Spirit is a great intercessor when we don't know what to say. And God, I pray, and a prayer of faith to know that you're listening. So God, I know not everything we go through is a huge deal. So just give us perspective and give us wisdom. Give us strength, God, and whatever it takes to lean on you more. I just pray, even if it's challenges, that we can embrace those, that trials can be met with joy, because we know that you're doing a good work. God, we're reminded of that in your word, and I pray that we can be faithful to your word just like you are. And God, help us to study tonight. Help us to grow tonight. If there are tough questions that we have, I pray, God, that you give us wisdom and discernment. But God, we ultimately want you to know that we love you and our whole lives are dedicated to you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. I'm going to move quick through the introduction, and that will be a good thing because it's stuff that you've seen before. Awful verse in Judges that we're going to actually see the addition of a possibly even more awful verse that keeps popping up towards the end of Judges tonight. But we see that the reason Judges is happening is because God's people sometimes are knuckleheads. Isn't that right? All the time? It was from the very beginning of time, and it was happening to the Israelites, and it was happening to the Christians, and it still happens to Christians today, doesn't it? That sometimes we can't get out of our own way, and we have a really hard time in surrendering and following. We have a hard time with obeying and authority when it comes to God's authority, so a lot of times we try to do things our own way. We get so close with the world and the culture that's around us that a lot of times that culture permeates who we are and infiltrates the person and the people that we are supposed to be. And in the book of Judges, we see that in a great way. So Joshua, towards the beginning of Judges, has recently passed away. And this verse comes right after the announcement that Joshua has passed away. It says, "And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that He had done for Israel." So a generation of people passed that had no idea about how good God was or everything that God has done up to that point for His people. Now, whose fault was that? The parents, right? Maybe even grandparents in some places. Maybe aunts and uncles, I don't know. But it was collectively the fault of God's people that they did not teach what God had done. And of course, we talk about that as a great call, that we never, ever, ever, ever hesitate to have spiritual conversations with our young ones. Not just the young ones who belong to you, but the young ones who do not. And I've been trying to experiment with that a little bit more, and I'll tell you what, the more you talk to our young people about spiritual things, the more you see them brighten up, and it's awkward at first. It really is, because they don't think a lot of times that that's what they want to talk about. But once you have that conversation just a couple times, and they know it's coming, it's fun to see them light up when you start asking about spiritual things. Simple questions. Is there anything I can pray for you about? All right, that's an easy one. And then you can pray for them, even right there. How is your relationship with God going? What are you studying right now in the Bible? Do you have any friends that you're talking about Jesus with? What challenges do you have going on in your life? You name it. There are so many things that are better than things that are just like, well, how's sports going? Did you see the game? And those things are fine to have. But man, may they never, ever outnumber the spiritual conversations that we're having. We don't want a generation that knows a lot about sports. We want a generation who knows a lot about what God is doing in the world and what He has done for His people. That process that happens over and over and over again, you can see it up on the screen. I won't necessarily go over it, but it's just what God's people have been going through in the book of Judges. Sin, destruction, repentance, forgiveness, a way out, back to sin, and it just keeps going and going and going. So we started the story of Samson. If you were to say Samson had a big, like one big area of life where he struggled, what would you say that area of life was, at least that we've seen so far? It was the girls, wasn't it? All right. We have already seen one, and we're going to see another tonight. It is a good thing that people, that God's people marry and get married. That's a good thing, right? Especially when two people who follow the Lord get married. Samson's big mistake, at least with his first wife, was what? Where did she come from? Where did he find her? Not within God's people, right? She was a Philistine woman, right? And Samson looked outside of what was supposed to be going on, what God had ordained a long time ago, and he went outside of the Israelites and married a Philistine woman. Now, I will say this. In Judges and what we just talked about last week, what we did see is that this was orchestrated by God. This was not just a poor choice that Samson made. But it was orchestrated by God. It said that God was looking for a reason to cause conflict with the Philistines. All right, so he allowed this to happen. You also saw Samson from a young age, actually from before birth. His mom dedicated him before even being born, that he took a certain vow. Do you remember what that vow was called? The Nazirite vow. Now, what did that entail? A few big things that we talked about. What did he abstain from with that Nazirite vow? Cutting his hair was a big one. A razor could not touch his hair. Yeah, nothing from the grapevine, right? He could drink no wine, and as we get further into it, eat no grapes or anything that came from the vine. And there was one more big one that we had talked about. You can't be around anything unclean, specifically dead things. All right? Now, for you and for me, would that be a hard thing? Like those three rules, if you take those, do you think you could live your life with those three pretty simple rules? It might be uncomfortable, right? But if it was a thing, because the Nazirite vow, of course, was what that basically meant was that the person who took that vow was consecrated unto the Lord, that he was set apart, that he was holy, that he was different. That was the vow that was made. So if it was for something like that, I guess I could let my hair grow out. Now, you may not like that, and I get letters to the church, that preacher needs to cut his hair, all that kind of stuff. But if it was a vow to the Lord, I think I could get that done. If it was a vow to the Lord that I would not eat grapes or drink anything that came from the grapevine, I could do that. In fact, I pretty much do that today. I've had grapes before. I don't do any drinking, but man, that would be an easy part. Not touching anything dead, I think I could handle that. Right? Except when I wonder if that would count at putting meat onto the grill. I don't know how that would work. Well, we talked about that last week a little bit. That would have been an obstacle for Samson because Samson was the only child of Manoah and his mom. And so not being able to touch anything dead or unclean when his parents would have passed away would have put him in a difficult spot. But there was no exemption between what the corpse was, or who it was, or what dead thing he was around. We saw him already break two of these parts of the vow. What do we see him break so far? So he killed the lion, right? Ripped that thing apart like a young goat, they said, and then he went back and did what? He went back and he found that lion. In that lion was what? Was honey. And what did he do? Ate that honey. Violation of the vow. So we had that going on as well. And there was some other stuff that we had gone to. I forget where we are in there or looking back at it. But he has violated the vow at least 2 times. Twice it says that he did not go and tell his parents about this because he did not want them to know that he had violated the vow. And one of the times where he attacked the Philistines, what did he use? A donkey's jawbone. Violation of the vow, right? He had touched the bones of something that was dead, but he killed 1,000 Philistines with just the jawbone of a donkey. Here's one thing I want to point out before we get reading again is this. We saw over and over and over, maybe not, maybe I exaggerated that. We've seen multiple times that when Samson goes into action, that the Spirit of the Lord rushes over him. Now, I don't want to do this. We've got to be really careful with that. Because everything that Samson did was not something that was pleasing to God. And so while God is providing Samson, as the judge here, an overflow of His Spirit to empower him to do incredible things, that does not mean that God approved of everything or endorsed everything that Samson did. All right? The relationship that he had would not be an endorsement. The relationship he's getting ready to have, not an endorsement. But we will see the breaking of the vow. Just because he gave his spirit to Samson doesn't mean he liked the breaking of the vow. He was still supposed to keep that vow. He was supposed to be a Nazirite from birth unto death, but He still provided His Spirit for him. But I don't want to get those two things mixed up, like the provision of the Spirit and the acceptance of the sin. Those two things are not the same thing. All right, so let's go ahead and open our Bibles up, and we're going to find Samson here in chapter 16. All right. First, real quick, I just want to mention where we are geographically. And you'll see a map up here on the screen for a second. Where Samson is now with the Philistines is at a place called Gaza. Have you heard of Gaza? Yeah, you have, because you have heard in the news a lot about this area right here called what? The Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Strip is a place of great contention even to this day. But we've seen Gaza all throughout the Old Testament in multiple places. First of all, it's mentioned in Genesis chapter 10, and you could go back and read that if you'd like to. This area in Joshua was conquered by Israel and taken over by Israel, and this was part of the area that was inherited by the tribe of Judah. All right, so the tribe of Judah inherited this land, but that was in Joshua 10. By the beginning of the book of Judges, which is not a long time, we see that that land is already back under the control of the Philistines. Now, what does that tell you about what the Israelites were supposed to do? When they went into Canaan, what were they supposed to do with the pagan cultures that were there? They were supposed to drive them out, right? To eliminate them. But for such a short span of time to happen, where Judah came in, was supposed to eliminate the Philistines from Gaza, but then and just a short time later, the Philistines have already taken back over. We could assume at this point that Judah did not do what it was supposed to do. But isn't that the story of Judges? The reason why we keep seeing the intermarrying, the reason why we keep seeing idol worship is because they didn't do what they were supposed to do up front. And they allowed those cultures to stay there, and they get permeated by those cultures. All right, that area right there is not too far from Jerusalem. Our map, I'm guilty of this. I look at the map of Israel and I think, man, that's huge, because I think about how we see the United States on a map, right? From Florida to California, would you want to walk that? No, you wouldn't. But sometimes on our map, that looks about the same distance as what we're looking in Israel right here. But from Jerusalem down to Gaza was only about 47 and a half miles. And so walking-wise, that would only be, typically about a 2-day walk from Jerusalem down to Gaza. But I want you to see this. I don't think it's any coincidence that this place that was not cleansed a long time ago is still a point of contention today. That between Gaza and the Western Bank, the Gaza Strip here, the Western Bank up here, Israel's all here in between, and we have Jordan over here, that these areas are under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority, and Gaza, that is still in the same area where Gaza is governed by Hamas right now. Like a very militant, extreme ISIS group, or extreme Muslim group is under control of this area right now. I just wonder out loud wonder if that would be different if God's people a long time ago would have done what they were supposed to do. But we still see conflict. We still see conflict. When we were in Israel, we did not go to the Gaza Strip. For good reason. All right? James, did we go to the Gaza Strip? No, we did not. I want to make sure. I get lost in where we were. But I just want to give you an idea of where this is happening. Of course, it's very close to Egypt, but where the Philistine stronghold was is Gaza. In fact, the word Gaza just means strong. It was always seen as a stronghold for the Philistines. So let's go ahead and read here what's happening in this place, since we know where Samson is. In chapter 16, and we're going to read quite a bit here to get the story. The first 22 verses. It says, Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her. Any red flags going up here? Why does this happen? First of all, I want us to understand here is that even though the people were judges, does not mean they were godly people. Right? The book of Judges is not a book of necessarily like heroes for God's people. It is the story of mess up after mess up after mess up. And sadly, once we get done with Samson's story, we're going to see even worse mess up happen after Samson is gone. It's only going to get worse. But Samson meets a prostitute, goes in and sleeps with her. It says the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, and they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. Now, let's ask a question. Why are the Philistines mad at Samson? He's been doing some crazy stuff, hasn't he? Now, we already talked about it. He killed 1,000 of them with a donkey's jawbone. Do you remember what he did to their crops before that? Burned them in a really cool way, though, right? What did he do? Yeah, lit the foxes' tails on fire and let them loose. That's a pretty creative thing, right? But he has been after the Philistines over and over and over again. Do you remember what made him mad at the Philistines? Right. Man, what this is like a soap opera, all right? This is you want to go watch your stories tomorrow. Just read through Samson's story again here, because you're right. After she deceived him to telling the riddle, remember that riddle about the lion and the honey? Her father, his father-in-law, gave the wife to a friend, to his best friend, right? To the best man is what it said, right? And he got so mad at that he just went on attack to the Philistines. All right? He just went on attack. And since that point, it has just been back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So now in Gaza, we see that Samson has gone in, he's found a prostitute, he has slept with her, and the Philistines get word, Samson's here. Do you think they have any revenge in mind? Oh, you better believe it. He has destroyed crops. He has killed 1,000 people. And not only just killed them, but he did it in a way that made them look weak. Who kills 1,000 people with an animal's bone? All right, just made them look weak. Let's keep on reading. And they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. And they kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning, and then we will kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose, took a hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill, that is in front of Hebron. All right, we can start to see this incredible strength. After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was... She's still on Magic 107.7 to this day. Never mind. It's the lady who gives love advice that needs love advice. We see Delilah's here just need love advice is what's going on here. But he meets a lady named Delilah, and he loves her. And going on in verse 5, it says, and the Lord of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him, and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. and we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. And she started to get a little bit of ching ching, that's a lot of money. So she's got to choose between the man she loves and a lot of money. And Delilah bats her eyes. And she goes into Samson and she says, please. Now, first of all, Samson should have ended it right here. Right? Because if the person you love comes in and says this, please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound so that one might be able to subdue you. Seriously? Like, you talk about knucklehead, you talk about maybe love-struck or lust-struck, whatever it might be at this point. When somebody asks you something like that, tell us where your strength is. Like, how could someone possibly tie you up and hold you down? You leave that relationship, right? You walk out of there. You don't stay in that place. But Samson said, well, okay, he's not the dumbest person in the world, but he does give a not right answer. Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and like any other man. So the Lord of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in ambush in the inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the bowstrings as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. And what should Samson have done right there? Booted her right out. Maybe it's a coincidence that the story that you've told the woman that you love just happened to that night happen. Maybe it was a coincidence that those men were just happened to be in the inner chamber. But then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you've mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound. So he makes up another story. And he said to her, if they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men lying in ambush were in the inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. And then Delilah said to Samson, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. Samson said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with the pin, then I shall become weak and like any other man. So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web. And she made them tight with the pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. And then she gave those words. She said, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. And she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, and his soul was vexed to death. Now, can we put into modern terms what just happened there? Someone describe to me what just happened there. She nagged the mess out of him. And he got so weary and tired of it that he just finally gave in. Instead of doing what would have been smartest, which would have been just to walk away from Delilah altogether, to get her out of where he lived, he stayed there. And she bickered and bickered and bickered. What does Proverbs say about a bickering wife. Now, don't just make something up. Be really careful. All right, and it could probably go both ways. But it is better to, there's a lot. Right? It's better to sit on the edge of the roof than to be with a bickering wife. The constant dripping of water is better than a bickering wife. And it goes on and on. Like there's sayings like that throughout Proverbs. But apparently Samson had to experience it. And his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all of his heart. And he said to her, I don't know what he was expecting at this point. He might have gotten so down and so just vexed in his soul, what it says, that he didn't really care about death anymore. Like anything is better than this. But he told her all of his heart and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. Now, is that totally true? Not anymore. Right, he'd already broken the vow, so he's not necessarily a Nazirite anymore, but he's still experiencing the strength that God's allowing him to have. He says, if my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. Now, is he lying this time? He definitely is not lying. Now, I wonder what he was expecting. But when Delilah saw that he had told her all of his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up again, for he has told me all of his heart. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. She made him sleep. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Samson must have been a heavy sleeper. And she said, I missed this part. Then she began to torment him. She'd been tormenting him for a while, and his strength left him. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza, and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now, if you were a witness to this account, what advice would you give Samson at this point? Or would you give any I told you so's? What would you want to say to Samson?
He was very strong, but he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed.
There might be something different between strong and smart. Yeah? As Mick so affectionately put it, he may not have been the sharpest tool in the shed. Anything else you'd want to say to Samson? Vernon?
You know, he had broken the vows twice, as you pointed out earlier, and his strength never left him. Perhaps he built up confidence that God wasn't going to depart from him.
Possibly.
Therefore, I can go ahead and give it out, and I'll still be all right. I've done it before.
Yeah.
I'll do it again.
Yep.
And I think sometimes we feel that way. We feel like we've done something wrong and had no result or bad effect from it, so we keep on. But eventually God will catch up with us.
That's a great point, Vernon. Great point. If you didn't hear Vernon, what he's talking about is, Samson had broken the vow twice already, right? But we still saw after the breaking of the vow that the Spirit of God powered him and that he kept his strength. And so Samson might have had the thought that, hey, I've done wrong before and God was still with me. What about this next time? And how often do we do that in our own lives, where we might do something and we may not get caught or we don't suffer consequences for it? And instead of repenting and fixing those actions, what we do is we just keep on going because, nothing happened the first time, or maybe even the second time or third time. But eventually the consequence, God will find it, He will find it, but eventually we will face the consequences for the actions that we did no matter what. But maybe that same thought process would have been going through Samson's mind. Well, nothing happened when I broke it the first time. Nothing happened when I broke it the second time. So why would something happen if my hair was cut? Great point. Great point. Any other comments or statements about Samson and Delilah right there? Raleigh?
God was, whenever he was with Samson, it was to bring about the destruction. Left Samson is to soon bring about the destruction. That's the not variable factor in this equation. So what did Samson mess up? If everything he does, whether right or wrong, is accomplishing God's purpose. And I think that, like, if you just look at Gideon's story, Gideon did not live such a miserable life as Samson. God will accomplish his purpose with or without us. But, like, if we will work with God, if we can avoid the sort of impetuous nature that Samson has, we can do it with God instead of used by God.
Yeah, another great point. I don't know if you heard Raleigh, but his comments were, and correct me if I mess these up, but God was going to accomplish his purpose no matter what. The Philistines were going to be brought down. That was the plan God always had. When you look at some of the other judges, they stayed a little bit more faithful than Samson did. Now, Gideon, towards the end, had some big struggle with the golden ephod and acting as king, but for the other part of his life, up to the point where God took care of the Midianites, he was right on God's side. He was asking for signs, that was okay, but he was obeying and he was doing what God was supposed to do. So he got to see God accomplish the work, but in a way where he got to be a part of it as well. Not a miserable part of it, but an active part of it. You see, Samson, in his story, he could have just kept the vow, right? He could have done what he was supposed to do. God would have still accomplished his purpose with the Philistines, but Samson would not have as miserable of time in the process of the accomplishment. And so basically this statement, God is going to accomplish his purposes with or without the help of his people. We get the choice to choose, are we going to go along with him, or are we going to suffer miserably without him, even though he's still going to accomplish his great purpose? Did I sum that up okay? Perfect? Man, awesome. Any other comments or anything you want to add with this part before we get into the demise of Samson? All right, let's read this little section real quick, and then we'll start wrapping things up. It says, "Now the Lord of the Philistines gathered to offer," we're in verse 23, by the way, "a great sacrifice to Dagon, the god, their God, and to rejoice. And they say, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand." Now that god, Dagon, of course, is their God. He is not, has no match for the one true living God. But the Philistine people back then believed Dagon was, and what I understand, was the father of Baal. And he was a half fish, half man entity that they would worship. He was the god not only of the sea, but of the grain, I believe, is what they are talking about in that. But he was seen to be kind of one of their chief gods. Again, the god of Baal, the Baal that you keep hearing throughout Judges that the people bowed to. Dagon was supposedly the father of Baal. And so Samson is delivered in their hands. They go and they worship Dagon because they believe that he is the one who gave Samson into their hands. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. For they say, our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country who has killed many of us. And when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson that he may entertain us. So remember, what state is Samson in up to this point? His hair is growing back, but it's still short. And he is blind. He doesn't have any eyeballs. He's not just blind, but they have gouged out his eyes. There is no chance of him seeing at this point. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars. Big mistake. And Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, "Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them." Apparently he is getting a little bit smarter. Right? He says, "Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there. And on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson entertained." All right, so all the lords, what we're talking about there is all the people who had just paid off Delilah to get the information to capture Samson. And then 3,000 men and women are watching and probably mocking Samson as he is entertaining them blindly. Verse 28 says, "Then Samson called to the Lord and said, 'O God, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once. O God, that I might be avenged on the Philistines, so I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes.' And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, 'Let me die with the Philistines.' Then he bowed with all of his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the peoples who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed during his life. And then his brother and all of his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had judged Israel for 20 years. All right. There's not a whole lot to talk about there with the death of Samson, unless anyone has any comments or things they want to add to the actual death side of Samson. But he knocks down the pillars, the wall the building falls. 3,000 men and women plus all the lords of the Philistines are killed at that time. Samson also is killed. He kills more people in his death than he ever did in his life. The way I see what was going on there was almost this mini story that we see of the Israelites happened right there with Samson's life. That they sin, they got punishment, they call out to God, God delivers. All right, we've been seeing that on a grand scale, but we see it right here in the little microcosm of just Samson's life. That he had messed up in a big way, he had forsaken his vow, he is punished or received some kind of testing or punishment. It gets to the point where he cries out for help to the Lord again. The Lord delivers, but then it just kind of ends it right there. Right? The Lord avenges Samson or allows Samson to be avenged. But this is where the pattern stops. Because what we've seen for a long time is judge after judge rules or judges Israel, leads Israel, and then after the time that they judge, there's a time of peace because God's people turn their ways back to God for an extended period of time. I think the longest time we've seen so far, I think, has been 80 years of peace. Sometimes we'll see 20 years, and I believe, I might be wrong on this, the longest time we've seen is 80 years of peace because the judge came and the people turned their hearts back towards God. And then you remember that infamous verse that keeps coming up. And then the people did what? Evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, we're going to see a transition here because Samson is avenged. The Philistines, or at least 3,000 of them, plus the lords, are killed. And what we would want to see at this point is it say, and then there was peace in Israel for a certain amount of years. But we don't see that. We see in chapter 18, well, let's just read a few verses and see what it says, okay? It says, in those days, maybe we'll just read one verse. In those days, there was no king in Israel. All right, we'll do a few. All right. And in those days, the tribe of the people of Dan. Oh, wait. I'm all the way at 18. I skipped 17. Let me go back to 17. And it will take us a few verses. There was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you. Now, who might his mother be at this point? There's some indication that this woman might be Delilah. Right? Why would you think this could be Delilah? That's the amount of silver that she was given by the Philistine lords. All right? The 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, and also spoke it in my ears. Behold, the silver is with me, I took it. All right, so what's going on here? This woman, and we won't name her Delilah, but it could be Delilah, had how much silver? 1,100 pieces of silver. And what happened to it? It went missing. And what did she do because of it? She called out a great curse because of losing that great amount of money. But it turns out all along, where was the money? Her son had taken it. And he was holding on to her 1,100 pieces of silver. And his mother said, Blessed be my son by the Lord. And he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother. And his mother said, I dedicate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son to make a carved image and a metal image. Now, there are two statements in there that do not go hand in hand. Right? What do you see? What kind of conflict do you see right here? Dedicating the silver to the Lord and what? Making an image of something. And we'll see what happens here. Now, therefore, I will restore it to you. So when he restored the money to his mother took 200 pieces of silver, gave it to the silversmith, who made a carved image and a metal image, and it was in the house of Micah. And then the man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and household gods, and ordained, like what right does this guy have to do this? Ordained one of his sons who became his priest. And in those days, here's what we get. A new kind of verse. And in those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Where do you think that's going to get the people? When have we ever seen that when everyone does what is right in their own eyes, that things just go well? We don't. We don't. Let's finish up. We're almost done with 17. We might as well go ahead and finish 17. It says, Now there was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite. What do we know about Levites? Priests, right? So guess what? When Micah has got this place where he has already built up a shrine and he has ordained his son to be a priest, when a Levite shows up, it's going to be like his token Levite, right? When a Levite shows up, he's going to get excited here. A Levite, he had sojourned there, and the man departed from the town of Bethlehem in Judah to sojourn where he could find a place. And as he journeyed, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. And Micah said to him, Where do you come from? And he said to him, I'm a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to sojourn where I may find a place. So Micah said to him, Stay with me, and be to me a father and a priest, and I'll give you 10 pieces of silver a year, and a suit of clothes, and your living. And the Levite went in, and the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. And Micah ordained the Levite. What right did Micah have to ordain anybody? No right at all. But he ordained this man to be a priest for him because he was a Levite. And the young man became his priest and was in the house of Micah. And Micah said, Now I know that the Lord will prosper me because I have a Levite as a priest. Really? Man, I wish we could finish 18, but we don't have time to. But 18 is kind of the culmination of this. And all I'm going to say to you is this. We're going to see things get worse. But why do we see things get worse? Because people are doing what they think is right. There is no one ruling over him. No more judges are being given. And so we're in a period of time now where everyone just does whatever they deem is right in their own eyes. And there's becoming now, we see it right off the bat, this mixture of things that they think are godly versus very pagan and ungodly things that are going on. For instance, setting up a temple to like carved, graven metal images, using a Levite to be a priest of that, and then assuming that God's going to bless it. Do you think that's going to work out well? Now, I'm going to skip. I had 18 in here, but what I'm going to do is skip over here to a couple questions. What happens when a people simply do what's right in their own eyes? Now, can we be really honest? This is where we live right now. Right? This is our culture. This is how far we've gotten to. Where you go and you talk to anybody, sometimes even people from churches, and the number one desire for so many people is just to do what they think is right. This is why we have so many messed up things in our world right now. Is because nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, not many people, it is very rare for people to take what they want to do, compare it to the Word of God, and then make a decision that follows the Word of God. Very rarely do we have people that are even concerned in our country anymore about what the Word of God even says. And so this is why we see things like churches or places, places that call themselves churches, that have ungodly things going on, like the ordination of transgender, homosexual priests and like those things don't work together. This is the same as what we're seeing here with Micah. It is taking something ungodly, putting it or trying to put it into a godly context and expecting God to bless it in some way. Will it ever happen? No, it won't. God does not bless evil. He doesn't bless those things that are outside of His will and what He's created. This is why our country has gotten to where we are. Because most people are chasing after what they want and what they think. Is it possible to do something in the name of God without it being blessed by God? All right. I already gave you a cheat of one way we see this happening. Can you think of any other way that we see this, where things get done in the name of God, or we call it in the name of God, but then it's not ever blessed by God? Okay. Yeah, so things that we just go out and do on our own, but we never ever even ask God to bless it. We could definitely do that. Yep.
How do you define blessed by God?
Well, just even recognized as a godly thing. So like you take what we saw with Micah, and he had the Levite priest leading and being a priest in this, what is a pagan temple now. And what Micah assumes is God is truly going to bless me now. And what we're going to end up seeing is that his whole house gets pillaged and all kinds of things. God surely did not bless that place. He did not accept it. Just because Micah had in his mind that this is for the Lord did not mean that it was the Lord's. It's kind of what I'm saying.
Because God makes the rain fall on the just and the unjust.
Sure.
So there's blessings that people have even though God doesn't condone what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that can be interpreted by some that God is blessing them.
Sure. Absolutely right. So we see that with, we sing songs about too, and it was a question that came up in one of the minor prophets. I forget which one it was, but basically it said, we see the people who are against you are prospering. Why is it even worth following you? And so we want, not in the context of blessing in this way, where you might gain something on your own because of this, but what I probably shouldn't say as blessed, I should have said, does God accept these things? Yeah. But do we ever see anything else in our culture that is in the name of God or even in churches sometimes, in the name of God. I don't have a right answer in mind right now. I'm just asking, putting it out there.
There is something in particular that bothers me when some Christians pray for military. So I wonder, are you praying for the military to return safe home and the other people return safe home, or the other people get back home dead? Or what? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I'll try to translate that over. But what Angelo's saying is there are times that we even pray about things that we have to maybe step back and consider. And the example Angelo gives is praying for military things, like a lot of times we do. What are we really praying for is the question that is there. Are we praying that there's peace and everyone goes home safely, or that our military kills everyone else and that, we get to live in comfort? And again, we don't necessarily have to dwell on that one question right there, but the question is valid. What is it that we're really seeking after there? It's past time, but, we sing songs and it is what we ask for. God bless America. But America has to be God's for it to be accepted and blessed by God. Like in the state that we are in right now, I believe God can bless us. I'm not saying He can't. We still see blessings. Right? Just the ability to do this right now is a blessing. But does that mean God would look down at America and say, you guys did it, this is what I wanted? In the state that we are in right now, I don't think so. And so what we have to be really careful of in this, and we'll see it next week, the destruction that ends up happening here, is that we don't just assume that because things seem to be going well, that it is acceptable to God, what we're actually doing. We have to be so mindful that every action, every decision, the way that we live our lives is actually dedicated towards God and is a godly practice, not just by looks. This guy had a priest, and that priest, not just a priest, he had a Levite as a priest. It was the right kind of person, but the worship was all wrong. So no matter if he had the right thing set up, the heart of what was going on was absolutely wrong, and that was not acceptable to God. And we're going to see that next week. I'll stop talking. Love you guys, and I will see you I'll see you Sunday morning bright and early at the